You heard our conversation yesterday, didn't you? My eldest son and his wife are coming back home for the birth of their child, so I need you to move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me? You can't have kids anyway. You don't help with my son's work. So, the least you could do is make some room. And I'm paying $10,000 in rent. This is getting too tiresome to deal with. I live with my mother-in-law, but now she wants me out of the house because my brother-in-law and his wife are returning. My mother-in-law, brother-in-law, his wife, and my husband. This house is full of problems. I've been trying to keep things running smoothly, but it's becoming a hassle to think about it all. I'm done thinking. Okay, I'll leave. But I can't just put my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you. That's a big help. Ignoring my pleased mother-in-law, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. Once I stopped thinking, no one could stop my actions. I'm Anna, a 40-year-old IT consultant. My husband Tom is also 40 and runs 3 restaurants as a sole proprietor. We're both 40, and people often assume we've been married a long time and have a kid or two, but we're actually newlyweds. We both lived as workaholics and didn't marry until this age. I had given up on marriage just before turning 40, but a random visit to a bar after work changed my mind. Is this your first time here? Yes, that's right. I had been curious about it for a while, but it was hard for me to go in alone because the store is so stylish. But I worked hard today, so I decided to go in as a reward to myself. I was relieved to find a counter where it was easy for a loner to spend time. We have many women who come alone, so feel free to visit anytime. My husband, Tom, chatted with me with a smile as I sat at the end of the bar. I knew he was just trying to attract a new customer. But for me, who had no casual acquaintances to dine with at this age, even this kind of customer service felt nice. Feeling comfortable in Tom's restaurant, I started visiting frequently. As a regular, I always sat at the end of the bar, and it became normal for Tom to chat with me while I ate. What does an IT consultant do? Introducing IT to companies, strategic planning. I've worked with restaurants too. Once, I suggested a tablet-based ordering system to reduce labor costs and improve efficiency. Oh, the system that's become common? How much does that cost? Well, for a place like this, it would cost about this much. No way, no way. That's too much for a small business like mine. As I punched numbers into my phone calculator and showed him the screen, Tom shook his head and hands vigorously. He's curious and always eager to learn from our conversations. He's looking for ways to apply new knowledge to his work. Even though it looked like just a pleasant conversation, I was slowly drawn to his dedication to his work. Likewise, Tom grew fond of me, seeing that I was a hard-working person. I'm always busy with work and can't talk much. How about we go out for dinner sometime? Excited about the chance to dine with a restaurateur, I eagerly agreed. I was thrilled to be asked out by my husband, but saying something so girlish at nearly 40 would be embarrassing, so let's just leave it at that. My husband didn't just ask me out that one day, he continued to invite me out for meals occasionally. It's natural for adult men and women who frequently dine together to develop a romantic relationship. We started dating, and 2 years later, as we both turned 40, we decided to get married. Feeling shy about being a bride at 40, I asked my husband to skip the wedding ceremony and just took some photos of us with dressed up. After we got married, I moved from my apartment to my husband's house. His house is a 3-story building with a garden and parking, located in a high-end area. The rent is apparently around $10,000. My husband was living there with his mother. Some might think it's unthinkable to live with a mother-in-law right after getting married. But I'm 40, so I don't mind much. Plus, my mother-in-law is 70, and my father-in-law has passed away, so living together seemed necessary. When my husband suggested living with his mother, I immediately said it was okay. But after starting to live with my mother-in-law, I regretted accepting so quickly. When I moved into my husband's house, besides the bedroom for us, I even got a lavish office room for myself. His house seemed too big for just 2 people, with many spare rooms. Once I settled in, I asked my husband a simple question. Why do we need such a big house just for you and your mother? I said I have a brother 3 years older than me. He left home after college and I've lost touch with him for the most part. He hasn't been home at all, and it's been a few years since I've heard from him, and he's been moving from job to job and place to place. He's such a man that one day he might get into trouble and come back to me and Mom, right? So we decided to rent a bigger house. I think it's a little too big. Well, I got married and you came, so I guess it all worked out. My husband, while unboxing my books and arranging them on the shelf, talked about his brother Richard with a smile. From his story, it seems Richard is aimlessly hopping from job to job, but my husband doesn't think badly of him. Don't talk about that kid. What if he really comes back? My mother-in-law appeared at the doorway of what would be my office, seemingly checking on us. It appears she doesn't have a good opinion of him, unlike my husband. It's understandable for a mother to show a cold reaction to an eldest son who shirks his responsibilities. However, I'm worried that my husband and my mother-in-law might clash over his brother someday. Also, I'm not too fond of you either. Mom, come on. We're going to live together now, so stop saying things like that. I'm not saying you should leave. I just need to make things clear from the start. My mother-in-law walked away, her slippers making a padding sound. I'm sorry. I'll talk to her. It's okay. I got a similar talk when we met for the wedding. I'll build a relationship with your mother as we live together. I took a book from my husband's paused hands and placed it on the shelf. It seems she doesn't like my age. I'm 40, so it's not impossible to have children, but I guess it's a challenging thought. Also, Tom's elder brother Richard is not married and has no children. So, there's a high chance that my mother-in-law won't get to see her grandchildren. That's why she's disappointed and wishes Tom had married someone younger. To her, Richard, who doesn't fulfill his role as the eldest son, and I, who can't fulfill my role as a wife in her eyes, are probably the same. I understand her feelings, but I can't turn back the clock on my body, so there's nothing I can do about that. Once the move was completely finished and our married life officially began, my mother-in-law's coldness towards me became evident. She ignored me when I spoke and tried to have as little to do with me as possible. It's a bit lonely, but since there's no harassment or physical violence, I guess I should consider it okay for now. I can build a relationship with her over time. But more pressing is my concern for Tom. Are you okay with your work? No, it's pretty bad. I need to take action soon, but it's tough to arrange the finances. After dinner, Tom was sitting at the dining table, his head in his hands. I stopped doing the dishes and sat down in front of him to listen. These are tough times. Prices are soaring, expenses are climbing, and customers are tightening their wallet. There's no end in sight. If this keeps up, I might have to close another one of our stores. About a year into our marriage, the situation at Tom's restaurants worsened. One of the 3 stores had already closed, and it seemed another might have to shut down too. Seeing Tom's troubled face made me feel distressed. But my mother-in-law seemed unaffected by these troubles. You're Tom's wife, but you don't help out at the store. You just do your own job. Can you really say you're fulfilling your role as a wife? Our conversation was overheard by my mother-in-law in the living room. She hurled insults at me from her seat on the sofa. I wondered what she was thinking, but she has her own way of seeing things. Tom has been running his own restaurant for nearly 10 years, overcoming various challenges. I believe he'll pull through this time too. You, his wife, shouldn't be making that face. Are you trying to feed into his anxiety and make him fail? What a terrible wife! She shouted again from the living room to the dining room. Her words towards me were filled with spite and venom. I knew she wasn't just trying to fire me up. But she wasn't entirely wrong. I took her words positively and decided to support Tom to the fullest, smiling reassuringly at my anxious husband. A year later, just as she said, Tom managed to turn the situation around and avoided closing a second store. See, I told you. A stupid wife who can't even trust her husband. Don't drag Tom down. As a side effect, my mother-in-law, who had previously ignored me, started lashing out at me without reservation. The relationship with her might seem to have worsened, but since Tom's business is doing well, I'll consider it a break-even situation. I thought things were balancing out, but it turned out to be a clear negative for me. Tom, having stabilized the business and with a bit more money, seemed to get carried away, and I heard rumors about his affair. What on earth is he thinking? If there's extra money, there are surely better ways to spend it. Also, it's strange how bad situations tend to pile up. Having seen Tom's business revenue drop, I know this all too well. But I never thought it would happen to me. Tom. Richard called. From my brother? Yes. Richard's girlfriend is pregnant. That's great news. She's a 32-year-old who worked at the same bar. And, Tom, they asked something. What? You're being so formal all of a sudden. Richard is a freelancer, and so is his pregnant girlfriend. With a baby on the way, they're struggling. They asked if they could move into this house. And they want to work at your restaurant. I was contemplating how to confront Tom about the affair from the dining room. Then, my mother-in-law came into the living room and started talking to him. The conversation was about Richard, whom I've never met, and I was completely left out as they continued talking. It was a strange scene. She used to dislike Richard for not fulfilling his role as the eldest son. Yet now, she was asking Tom to welcome him. The reason was simple: the grandchild. She had given up hope of seeing a grandchild but now saw an opportunity and completely changed her stance. She was even planning to offer them a home and jobs. Tom, who never thought badly of Richard, had rented this big house for such a time. But the situation has changed, and now I'm here. Is it not odd to have Richard and his family move in? I looked at Tom in the living room from the dining area. He was looking back at me with a clearly troubled expression. Come on, it's a good thing. Richard is in trouble, and you, Tom, have the means to help him. Ah, okay, I got it. I sighed at Tom's inability to say no to his mother. I had hoped he would stand up to her, but it seems it was just wishful thinking. He kept glancing at me, probably worried about my reaction. The worsening relationship with my mother-in-law, Tom's affair, now living with Richard and his family, the problems just keep piling up. Overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, I decided to abandon thinking for today and just go to sleep. The next day, being a holiday and probably due to extreme mental fatigue, I slept in until late morning. Tom was at work, so it was just my mother-in-law and me at home. Dreading what she might say about my sleeping in, I reluctantly headed to the living room. You sure slept in. Must be nice to have such leisure. Bracing myself for her usual nagging about not fulfilling my duties as a wife, I tensed up, ready for her words. However, what she said easily surpassed my expectations. You heard Tom and me talking yesterday, right? Richard and his wife are coming back for a maternity leave visit, so move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me? Was I still groggy from sleep? She really meant I should live in the yard? Or was she telling me to leave the house? You can't have kids anyway. You don't help with Tom's work. So, you should at least make room for Richard and his family. We have 2 spare rooms left, so if you leave and your office is free, we can have a bedroom and a nursery for Richard's family, and a storage room for their stuff. Don't you think the room count and usage are just perfect? It seemed she was indeed telling me to leave. But a storage room for Richard's family? I'm being kicked out to make room for a space that doesn't seem necessary. Originally, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms, and I don't mind if it's gone. A bedroom for Tom and me is enough. Richard's family can live here without me leaving. Realizing that my mother-in-law now sees no reason for me to be in this house as a wife since she can see her grandchild. And I'm paying $10,000 in rent. I'm too tired to deal with all this. I decided to clear my mind and give my brain a rest. Silent with my mother-in-law, the only sound in the living room was the ticking of the clock. Okay, time to leave. Having rested my mind, I decided it's too much trouble to worry about what happens to Tom, my mother-in-law, Richard's family, and their future. I chose to leave the house. Understood. I'll leave. I can't put all my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you. That helps. Ignoring my pleased mother-in-law, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. My decision, made after stopping my overthinking, couldn't be stopped by anyone. Let them all regret this choice later. Having left the house, I decided to stay at a hotel for the time being. I had called the junk removal service, but they needed some time to prepare. This worked out since I wanted some time too. 2 weeks after leaving, I rented an apartment and started living alone. I haven't heard from Tom since then. He probably thinks I'll come back eventually. The thought of Tom taking the current situation lightly infuriates me. However, today is the day after his restaurant's day off. I expect a call from Tom when he visits the restaurant for lunch prep. Hey! What's going on here? The restaurant is completely empty. Just as I thought, Tom called. I could explain over the phone, but it would be more efficient if your mom was there too. I'm heading to the house now, can you come back? You can't open the restaurant anyway, right? I couldn't help but laugh before hanging up, amused by Tom's reaction. He must be quite shocked. Still chuckling, I started getting ready to leave. What on earth is this? The restaurant's fridge, cooking equipment, tables, all the important stuff is gone. You did this, didn't you? Do you think you can get away with this for free? As soon as I arrived at the house, my mother-in-law started yelling at me. It seems Tom had explained half of the situation. There was an unfamiliar couple in the living room. Apparently Richard and his wife. They looked confused and anxious, not fully grasping the situation and my mother-in-law's extreme anger. Why would you do such a thing? The restaurant can't operate now. It's my restaurant, so there shouldn't be a problem with me starting the closing process or having the items I bought disposed of by a junk removal service, right? Huh? Your restaurant? What are you talking about? Why don't you explain, Tom? You haven't told your mom, have you? You remember that I still has the main restaurant and the second branch, and the second one was in a financial crisis, right? Yes, of course. You worked hard to turn it around, changing the tables, chairs, signboard, the restaurant's atmosphere, bringing in new cooking equipment, expanding the menu, and replacing the fridge and freezer to accommodate the new menu, right? Well, about that. Anna actually paid for those expenses. What? What do you mean? Hearing Tom's words, my mother-in-law looked perplexed. She seemed to be trying hard to understand, but probably lacked the full information to grasp everything. Tom continued, looking uncomfortable as if he was holding back a bathroom break. Seeing that this was going nowhere, I decided to explain. Before turning 40, I was single and working in IT consulting. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, nor did we buy a new house after getting married. So, I had saved up quite a bit of money. I lent Tom $200,000 to help turn around his struggling second restaurant branch. $200,000? But you can't just hand over such a large amount of money to your spouse, right? That's why I decided to buy the rights to the second branch and become its owner. I left most of the management to Tom, so there wasn't much for me to do as the owner. The only change was that Tom shifted his focus from the main branch to the second one for its recovery. When Tom's restaurant was in a crisis, I too showed my concern alongside him. It was when my mother-in-law yelled at me for not showing enough trust in my husband that I decided to support Tom to the fullest. My form of support was giving him the money I had saved during my single years. Tom, is this true? Yeah, it's true. She said it was okay if I failed and wasted the $200,000. She gave me the money. But since it was such a large amount, if it was going to fail anyway, she suggested becoming the owner. The plan was to pay back the borrowed $200,000 from the restaurant's earnings, but it was simpler for Anna to become the owner and have the restaurant's income go directly to her. It also meant that she could decide whether to close the restaurant or not.
It's a lie! Can something like that really happen?
I understand it's hard to believe hearing this all of a sudden. That's why I brought some evidence. I spread documents like the business license, transfer of rights agreement, and lease agreement on the table, proving that I was the owner of the restaurant. My mother-in-law's face turned red as she confirmed my name on those documents.
Why didn't you say anything about this?
You always talked about how you believed in Tom and how the restaurant was recovering, right? Even before we got married, you always encouraged Tom like that. He felt pressured by your words but tried to live up to your expectations, not wanting to disappoint you as the head of the household. You're pretty cold to people like me and Richard, who don't fulfill their roles, right? That's why Tom couldn't tell you he borrowed a large sum of money from me.
He could have just told me.
That's why Tom couldn't speak his mind, because she gets upset easily. People like my mother-in-law often don't realize they're putting pressure on others. They might think it's just a small thing to say, but for the one under pressure, it's a huge burden, not something they can easily talk about. And even if they did speak up, she would likely be disappointed and start complaining. It was essential not to let Tom's spirit break under her constant jabs, especially when the restaurant was finally turning around. That's why I kept quiet too. But I really wished she had refused when Richard and his family were coming back. Probably, Tom thought it was work-related and agreed without thinking much. Mom, Anna, I'm sorry. This situation is my fault for not being decisive enough. If I had managed the restaurant well from the start, Anna wouldn't have had to lend her money, and if I wasn't such a weakling, I could have told you the truth. If Anna decides to close the restaurant, then that's it. But what about the part-time workers? Don't worry, in the past 2 weeks, I've already informed everyone about closing the restaurant, and they've all understood. For those interested, I've arranged part-time work at other restaurants through my IT consulting contacts. That's a relief. That was my only concern. So everyone was in on this? Anna showing me an empty restaurant as a surprise and everyone keeping the closure from me. Tom, I'm sorry too. I've been pressuring you. And Anna, I'm sorry for everything up to now. I won't tell you to leave again. Tom and my mother-in-law apologized, and it seemed as if everything was resolving nicely. But that's a misunderstanding. I'm far from being satisfied, and the discussion is far from over. Let's settle this matter next.
What, this? A divorce paper?
When I placed the divorce papers on the table, Tom picked them up in shock.
What does this mean? Why a divorce? This is supposed to be a reconciliation, right?
Don't just assume we've reconciled. You might think it's a secret, but I know about your affair with the part-timer. All the part-time workers knew about it too.
That's just a rumor. You can't say things like that without proof.
I displayed an image on my smartphone that a part-time worker had sent me and placed it on the table, amidst the scattered documents. This, a photo of entering a hotel. It was taken by one of the part-timers. If you leave the restaurant together and walk towards the nearby hotel district, anyone can take such evidence, not just the police or detectives. Did getting the second branch back on track give you too much confidence? You really got carried away. As the owner of the restaurant, I couldn't do much in terms of day-to-day operations. But I couldn't just stay away from the restaurant, so I made it a point to visit from time to time. That's when the part-time workers complained to me about Tom's affair and asked for my help. When I promised to handle it, they provided incredible support. The information about Tom's affair was leaked, they sent me proof, and even kept silent about the restaurant's closure from him. Wait a minute. closing the second branch and a divorce. What's going to happen to the rent for this place? The rent for this place? What do you mean? I haven't mentioned that yet. I've been paying the entire rent of $10,000 a month for this house. Is that also true? It's true. When the restaurant's revenue started falling, Anna started paying half of it. But as revenue continued to drop, the amount she had to cover increased. Eventually, I ended up paying it all. $10,000 a month is the same as my salary. So, I paid all the rent, and Tom covered other living expenses like food and utilities. So, if Tom gets divorced and only has the main restaurant left, obviously, living here won't be an option anymore. Tom and my mother-in-law seemed deflated after hearing my words. They slumped as if they had exhausted themselves in a boxing match. Richard and his wife, now somewhat understanding the situation, hesitantly joined the conversation.
What? What does that mean? We came back here and can't live here? Wait, Richard. This is different from what we heard. We thought everything would be fine once we got back home.
Sorry, Richard. Right now, I don't have the means to help you with a restaurant or a house.
Come on, do something. We're having a baby. At least give me a job.
We have enough part-timers. In fact, we need to cut down on staff costs.
Tom will work hard, so just wait a bit longer. That's what I'm talking about. Stop saying things like that. Hey! What about my house and job now?
Tom, my mother-in-law, and Richard started arguing about their future lives. Richard's wife, whose name I still didn't know, looked uncomfortably out of place. I had delivered the news about the restaurant's closure and the divorce, so my business here was done. I was tired of constantly trying to smooth things over with Tom and his family. And I refused to live with Richard and his wife. I don't care what happens to this house next. They can discuss it amongst themselves. I left the house amidst their shouting. After that, having evidence of the affair, I was able to divorce Tom smoothly. I could have demanded alimony for the affair, but I had a job and didn't need the money. I wanted as little to do with my ex-husband and his family as possible, so I didn't ask for any compensation. After our divorce, my ex-husband Tom, unable to afford the rent, had to leave the house with his whole family. At that time, financially and emotionally strained, Tom, who had been taking care of his mother, argued that it was actually Richard's responsibility as the eldest son. Of course, Richard, who had come back without any money, couldn't possibly take care of her. This led to an ugly fight between the brothers about who should take care of their mother. In the end, with no income, Tom had to take her in, but this fight ruined the relationship between the brothers. As a result, Richard and his wife disappeared again, cutting off all contact. Witnessing the brothers dispute over her, the mother-child relationship also deteriorated. Now, Tom and his mother are living together reluctantly in a smaller apartment. It's not as spacious as the previous house, and they have to see each other all the time, but they hardly talk, creating an awkward atmosphere in the house. My actions, prompted by thinking ahead, resulted in the breakdown of a family relationship. After the divorce, I first dealt with closing down the restaurant. It was a bit of a hassle, but as the owner, it was my responsibility. However, the fridge, cooking equipment, tables, and chairs I had removed were fairly new, so I managed to sell them at a good price. So, adding just a little more money allowed me to finish the restaurant's closure. Though it was a brief period, being a restaurant owner and handling its closure was an experience. I believe these experiences will be useful in my IT consulting work someday. I guess work suits me better than marriage. Convinced of this, I continue to work hard today. My name is Sarah Jones. I've been married for 3 years, and I haven't quit my job, so I'm more of a wife in name only. That's because I'm always running around the country for work, and I'm hardly ever at home. My husband, David, understands this about my job and gently says that it's important for women to work too. I was grateful that there was someone in this world who understood and trusted me like that. But about 6 months ago, I learned that it was all just my assumption. It turned out that David had a mistress. At the time, it turned into a huge fight, and I screamed that I was going to confront that woman. Whether it was a good thing or not, David broke up with her. But after that, I couldn't trust my husband anymore. I was always wondering what he was doing and what he was up to. But I couldn't just stop going on business trips, and that day I was heading to a certain region. I've got some time. What should I do? Looking around, I noticed a stylish cafe.
Oh, what a lovely place. I'll spend some time there.
I casually entered and sat down, as I always do. The cafe wasn't too crowded, just a few customers. Among them, a couple holding hands across the table caught my eye. They looked so happy together. But then, I realized that the man was David. What? David? Why is he here? He's supposed to be at home today. The word cheating popped into my mind. Is he cheating on me again while I'm working? The cafe had music playing at a pleasant volume, and I could hear the conversation because there weren't many customers. I focused only on David and the woman's voices and started recording a video. Then I heard something unbelievable from David.
Let's get married.
But what about your wife?
I'll divorce her. When she found out about us 6 months ago, she was furious. That's when I realized it. It's only you, Emily, that I truly love. Really? You're really going to marry me? Yes, I'll always be with you from now on.
He then placed a ring box on the table. What? A proposal? While I'm here? I was shocked and saddened at the same time. I stopped recording, canceled my order, and left the cafe. So, that's how it was. Everything until now was just to deceive me. I get it now. Be happy, then. I whispered to myself as I slipped into an alley. It must have looked strange to see a 30-year-old woman standing there. But I couldn't stop the tears. I felt like an unnecessary person, realizing that everything I thought was love was falling apart. Ever since the affair was revealed 6 months ago, it felt like everything had been crumbling. I was always watching my husband, constantly contacting him even when we were apart. I would get anxious if he didn't reply and even wanted to cancel my business trips. But at that time, David did say he was breaking up with his mistress. I broke up with her. Really? Yeah, it's true. Look, I even deleted her from my contacts. I checked and indeed, the woman's name was gone. I felt relieved, but then it occurred to me that he might have just changed the name and the profile picture. Or perhaps, he could have bought another smartphone. After that, I continued to be on business trips. I kept in touch with my husband during that time, but that didn't mean he was alone. Yet, I tried to believe his words when he sent me pictures, claiming he was by himself. He wouldn't cheat again, not ever. It must have been just a momentary lapse. After all, he said he loved me, a career woman. That's why I didn't quit my job and made it this far. I kept telling myself that. But was it all just an act from David? While claiming to have broken up, they hadn't, and their affair continued. Even worse, they were taking advantage of my business trips to go on romantic getaways. I was devastated by this unbelievable reality. After being treated this way, I wasn't even sure if I still loved him. Over these 6 months, I kept reminding myself that we were married. Divorce isn't something to be taken lightly. That's why I tried so hard to keep our marriage going. Was I the only one thinking this way? How foolish. It was all a one-sided effort. Maybe it's better to end things cleanly for his happiness. If he loves that woman so much, perhaps it's best for me to step back. That thought crossed my mind. It would be easier for me too, probably. I played back the video I recorded earlier, trying to sort out my feelings. There they were, the woman's happy face and my husband's joyful expression. Their touching hands and the ring box. Let's get married. No matter how many times I heard it, my husband's words sounded the same. He clearly stated he was leaving me and expressed his love to her, holding her hand. And those words, "I'll always be with you from now on," never changed. But although the recorded words remained the same, the more I listened, the more my feelings inside changed. From wishing them happiness, I began to think, why should I, the one being betrayed, quietly step back? This is absurd. My feelings were turning into unstoppable anger and irritation. Hatred towards my husband was growing. I couldn't just let it end like this. With that thought, I made a phone call. If we were to separate, I'd drag him through hell first. And true to my word, I had just secured my ticket to do so. After finishing my work, I returned home the next day. As I laid tired on the sofa, the front door, which no one was supposed to come through, opened. I instinctively sat up, ready for anything, and then my husband hurried in. "Well, welcome back. Carrying such a big bag, where have you been? Looks like you went on a trip." "What?" By yesterday, I had already sent that video to my in-laws. His early return must have been due to something they said about the video. And he must have rushed back after finding out I was the one who sent it. But I pretended ignorance. I wanted to see my panicking husband's face. "When you contacted me, it was a picture of our home. Why are you carrying such a big bag?" Indeed, the picture he sent, as usual, was taken on this living room sofa. Basically, he had just sent an old photo to deceive me. Now that I think about it, I had received similar photos before. He must have taken several to trick me. And I had been reassured by those photos. "Oh, you're back quite early." "Yes, I finished my work early. It usually takes about a week. I was worried about you, so I came back early. Originally, this trip was supposed to be straightforward. But I had planned to visit other places too. If only I hadn't seen that cheating scene. By the way, you look quite upset. Did your parents say something to you?" How do you know about that?" "No, that video." "Video? Oh, that one. It's well recorded, isn't it? You were at that cafe." "Yes. I just happened to choose that cafe for a break, and there you were. With the mistress you claimed to have left. My parents scolded me. Well, that's to be expected if they have any sense of decency. It's unfair." "What? What's unfair?" "Sending the video?" "But I didn't interrupt your proposal, did I? I didn't slap the happy face of your girlfriend. You should be thankful. It was a once-in-a-lifetime proposal, right?" I never imagined you'd be proposing in that cafe, especially not in the middle of a romantic getaway with your mistress." "Everything's been exposed, hasn't it?" "Yes, it's obvious when you see such a scene." "Yeah, if that's the case, I should have stayed out longer. Rushing back was a waste." Unbelievably, my husband was defiant and unapologetic. Did he really want to anger me this much? "That's the woman you said you broke up with 6 months ago, right?" "Yeah, that's right." "So you didn't break up with her?" "No, that's correct." "Basically, everything was a lie?" "Yes, it was a lie. Seeing you like a demon, glaring at me. I can't forget that face. It made me lose my love for you." "So, it's my fault, you're saying? If you had understood my feelings more, I wouldn't have cheated. But don't you think that requires a conversation? You never expressed your feelings. And now, you're blaming me." "It's not about blaming. I just wish you had understood me. But you said you liked that I'm a career woman. You wanted me to continue my job, so I did. I didn't expect you to be away on business so much. I felt lonely, so my heart wandered to another woman." That sounds like a child's excuse. Ignoring your own responsibilities. "Say whatever you want." So, you're going to marry her?" "Yes, I want to start over with her." "So, let's get divorced." "You're demanding understanding for your feelings, yet you haven't considered mine at all. It's laughable how selfish you are. Laugh if you want. I want to divorce you. You know, divorce should come before proposing to someone else. If I don't agree to divorce, your proposal with the ring you prepared will be in vain. Polygamy isn't allowed in Japan, you know. You know I cheated. You're going to divorce me, right? I've already decided to leave. Divorce requires mutual consent. It doesn't matter if only you decide. Or did you delay the divorce in case she didn't accept your proposal? So, this marriage is like insurance for you? That's. My husband fell silent after that. A silent moment passed between us, with no conclusion reached. But it seemed he was firmly intent on divorce. He's the worst. Was he always this awful? Fine. I'll give you a divorce. But in return, I'm keeping this house. Fine, I'll leave. I stood up, took out the divorce papers I had just received from the office, and started to sign them. Watching me, I could tell my husband was relieved. Here, sign this. Once you've written it, I'll submit it to the office. You're not going to just take this and not submit it, right? Of course not. I don't want to drag out this ridiculous situation any longer than necessary. So don't worry. True to my word, after my husband left, I went to my parents' house, had them fill in the approval section, and submitted the papers to the office. I never thought the divorce would be finalized so quickly, but I didn't want to be connected to a man like that any longer. After all, I had an important task left, seeking revenge on my husband. About 2 weeks later, my ex-husband, David, called me excitedly.
I got married today. Man, thank you. Now she's my wife. I feel bad for you, but this is my happiness.
Is that so? Congratulations.
Yeah, it's like a dream.
What about the wedding ceremony? Well, she's quite modest. She said she didn't need a ceremony, just wanted to be my wife as soon as possible. So we just took some photos and that was it. Really? Where are you living now? We're still living separately. Why would you live separately after getting married? I thought you'd live together right away. Well, I wanted that too, but she asked me to wait. She wants to clean up her apartment to make it suitable for us as a couple. What do you mean? We're going to live in the apartment she's living in now. It's quite spacious, but it's a mess right now. She wants to tidy it up first. I offered to help, but she wants to decorate the new place by herself. She's really earnest. So where are you staying now? In a weekly apartment. It has everything I need. Have you been to her apartment? You're married, so you must have been there, right? No, that's the thing. She's old-fashioned. She said she couldn't let a man into her room until we were married. It's unbelievable. We got intimate so quickly, but she's so different. But you've been to hotels, right? Well, yeah. We went on trips together. That was natural. And yet she won't let you into her apartment. And you find that modest? Yeah, she said no to the apartment. Interesting. Do you really know her well? What? Of course, I do. I wouldn't have married her otherwise. I mean, do you really know her? What are you talking about? I wouldn't marry someone I didn't know. Did you know her mother is seriously ill? What? She needs care. How do you know that? I looked it up. Why? She took my husband, after all. It's natural to investigate. So, what's her illness? It requires constant care. But I heard her brother lives with her. Her brother is in prison, though.
What? No way.
Yes. He's a banker. Well, he was a banker. What do you mean? For the sake of a woman, he embezzled money from the bank. After all, it's a bank, there's plenty of money there, right? He took as much as he wanted. The amount is about $1.6 million, I heard. He's serving time now, but that money still needs to be repaid, so it's a tough situation. That's his problem, not hers. Did you know she has debts too?
What? No way. I didn't hear anything about that.
She probably couldn't tell you. How much? $800,000. $800,000. That must be the money for the house renovation you mentioned, right? And you said that your parents paid for it? Have you never been to her parents' house? Oh, yeah. Why not? Didn't you go there to introduce yourself for the marriage? I was told that it's not necessary because I was feeling unwell. They said as long as we're happy, that's all that matters. It's all about how you say things, huh? Well, you'll see soon enough, but it's pretty much a rundown house. I can't imagine her parents have much money if they live there. And I doubt that house was ever renovated. If it really was, you should find out which contractor did it and file a complaint. So, about the debt. Mostly for her own expenses. She seems to be quite the spender. Only wears expensive clothes and jewelry. And she goes to the beauty salon every week, never misses her nail appointments or spa treatments. That can't be true. Really? Didn't she always wear expensive-looking items? Designer bags and all. Didn't you wonder where all that money came from? She must have her own income. Well, think what you want. My husband adamantly refused to believe it, insisting it was all lies. I expected that response. By the way, congratulations on becoming a father of 3 so soon after getting married.
What? What are you talking about? She's not even pregnant yet. How can there be 3 kids?
Don't worry. Are you sure you're okay not knowing the reality? She already has 3 children, living with her parents. At her parents' place? Yes. Soon, she'll probably move in with them. Then you'll quickly become a father of 3. Plus, she's pregnant now. So, a 4th is on the way within a year. Congratulations, Dad.
That's a lie. She would have told me if she was pregnant.
But she is pregnant. You should check it. She's been going to the obstetrician regularly. The baby is due in about 7 months.
If it's my child, she would tell me. If she hasn't, it means she's not pregnant. Maybe she has a gynecological condition. Your detective must have made a mistake.
Maybe she didn't tell you because it's not your child.
That's ridiculous.
Well, anyway. Have your parents said anything since then? Yeah, they called me a fool. Asking how I'm going to handle things now. I don't even know what they mean by that. From your parents' perspective, it makes sense. I've been sending them money up until now. Money? That's the first I've heard of it. Why would you need to send them money? They both work. Your father is retired, and your mother can't work due to her back pain. I've been sending them money, which is why they've been getting by. But now, I won't be sending any more money, so they'll probably struggle. Why didn't you tell me? What's the use in saying anything? Your salary is so small that we were barely getting by. But when they asked for help, I couldn't just turn them down. I knew it would be pointless to tell you, so I sent the money myself. That makes me a pretty good wife to your parents, huh? I didn't know anything about that. Well, maybe things worked out then. After saying that, I hung up the phone. But a few days later, I got a call from David, saying things were tough. We had to move into my wife's family home, and now her parents are moving in too. Oh, that's good. It's much easier than sending them money. Yeah, but when we moved in, I found out her family's home is really run down, just like you said. What about her apartment? She said she gave it up. It was a waste of money to rent it, better to live at the family home. Nice try. She wasn't living in any apartment. Really? But every time I dropped her off, it was right in front of an apartment complex. She never went inside the apartment, did she? Well, no. She always saw me off. Haha, clever. So, was her family home renovated? No, far from it. It's small and dirty. My parents say they can't live in a place like that. So I told her if she has a problem with it, she can leave. But then she said, after everything they've done for me, I should pay back all the money they spent on me. Typical. Now I'm living there, listening to my parents' complaints. They do nothing and don't work, and my wife complains about them. Well, even after retirement, many people still work. If they're able to, that's what happens. And to top it off, there are 3 kids. That's what I said. 3 kids without any trouble. Congratulations. What's there to congratulate? The kids are calling me their new dad. How many dads have they had? And they're patting her belly, asking when the baby's coming. So, everything you said was true. I told you it was true. You were the only one who didn't believe. I never thought it was true. I thought you were just jealous. Oh really? And now, with a sick mother and 3 kids, plus my parents, it's like a big, noisy family. Sounds lively and nice. I asked my wife if she's pregnant. She said yes. I asked whose child it is, and she said it's hers. Of course, it is. No, it's not. When I said it must be another man's, she said she doesn't know. It doesn't matter whose child it is. The fact that it's her child is all that matters, and that's enough.
Wow, that's cool.
It's not funny. Being the father of a child whose father I don't even know. I can't stand it. I said we should divorce, but she refuses to. What am I supposed to do now?
Well, you reap what you sow.
It's not a laughing matter. With the family suddenly growing this much, I can't afford it with my income. You chose her, so you have to deal with it. That's true, but my parents are blaming me for betraying you, Sarah. That sounds about right. Yeah, I think so too. But she always looks so neat and tidy, I thought she was a decent person. Oh, by the way, what about her debt? Ah, I heard about that too. You're right. It's $800,000. Now it looks like I have to pay it back. Figures it would come to that. Yeah, when I asked my wife why it had to be me, she said, I'm pregnant. We have a child, and I have to take care of my mother. With all that, how can you expect me to work? She said it with a face like a demon. To top it off, she said she married me because she thought I was someone who could take on all this. Can you believe such nonsense? That's pretty calculated. Yeah, it feels like I've been trapped. Like caught in a spider's web. But you walked into it willingly, so there's not much you can do about it. Your brother, was he in prison? Yeah, you got it. He really was in prison, for embezzling $1.6 million. My wife says I should pay that back too. After all, he's in prison, so the family should help each other out, she says. But why won't she work herself? Because she's pregnant.
You seem to be enjoying this. How could this not be fun? I'm watching you get boiled in hell's cauldron. Were you always this spiteful? I became this way thanks to you. Thanks a lot.
That's harsh. But I still have a hell card to give you. What's a hell card?
If I hand you this card, you can warp from the 3rd district of hell to the 1st. Or is it the other way around? Anyway, you're in for more suffering. You really want to push me further into hell?
Of course. You said we were separated but stayed connected to your mistress. After being betrayed so much, how could I laugh it off and forgive? Don't underestimate women.
Please stop.
I can't do that. So, what's this card about?
You'll find out soon enough. Keep an eye on your mailbox.
True to her word, a few days later, a frantic David came to my house. I opened the door but didn't let him inside and decided to listen to him.
Hey, what is this?
Ah, did the hell card arrive?
What hell? Why are you sending me this bill now?
He was holding a letter from a law firm. I didn't need to hear it to know it was a demand for alimony. Why? Because the reason for our divorce is all on you, David. Plus, there's a video proof of him proposing to your mistress, so it's only natural that you get billed, right? Why now? Because now's the best time. Why? You're in the spotlight with your huge debt, your family's growing, and you're suffering, right? Yeah, I'm suffering. Adding alimony to that mix, doesn't that just make the suffering the worst? Yeah, I'm suffering. I wanted to give you that suffering. You're a demon. You made me into this, David. Pay it all at once.
You're kidding. I don't have that kind of money.
Then borrow it. Your brother embezzled $1.6 million, your wife $800,000. And this alimony? It's just a drop in the bucket. It's like adding a single drop of water to a burnt pan. I'm ruined. Yes, you underestimated me.
Come on, forgive me. Please, let's pretend this never happened.
I won't. That's a joke.
Please. Don't make me suffer anymore.
You brought this on yourself. Why do you enjoy making me suffer so much? It's fun. I'm putting the guy who dropped me into hell himself. Is there anything more enjoyable? Have you ever imagined how I felt watching my husband propose to another woman right in front of me? You haven't, right? That's hell. So, I decided to put you in hell. This is just how it has to be. Everything is your own doing. Hang in there, Dad.
Please, stop.
David just sat down right there, crying and begging for forgiveness. But of course, I had no intention of forgiving him. Watching David suffer was deeply satisfying for me. Afterwards, David did work desperately, but a daytime job was hardly enough. He kept getting complaints from his family. So, he had no choice but to increase his income by working part-time at night and on weekends. But no matter how much he worked, it was never enough, and he was constantly blamed. This led to him suffering from depression, finding it hard to interact with people, and going to work while on medication. If only his wife had been kind to him. Or if his parents had been kind, maybe things would have been different. However, his family forced him to work, not allowing him to rest, insisting that as the breadwinner, he mustn't stop. Driven to the edge, David eventually couldn't work anymore. He would say he was going to work, but just spent his days blankly sitting in the park. Eventually, his income dropped to zero, and his wife, seeing no use for such a man, kicked out David and his parents. Leaving the house with his parents, it seemed David might find some relief. He rented an apartment, seeking peace of mind, but still faced pressure from his parents to work, and nothing really changed. Recently, I heard from his in-laws that David was missing and they asked if he had come to me. Of course, he hadn't, so I told them that, only to hear a sigh in response. Once, I did see a man who looked like David. Apparently, he had fallen into homelessness, rummaging through trash cans. Yet, his face seemed somewhat peaceful. As for me, I'm living a life of elegance alone. Still traveling all over the country, I spend my days with no worries or anxieties, thoroughly enjoying every moment. My name is Mirabelle Watson. My husband and I have been married for 20 years, and we have 2 daughters, 19 and 17 years old. Our eldest, Sally, is in college, and our younger daughter, Julie, is in high school and aiming for the same college as her sister. My husband, who was raised in a wealthy family with his father being a business owner, had a very different upbringing from mine, which was in a typical working-class family. He's an artist, but his work just doesn't sell. As a result, we're perpetually broke, and I'm pretty much supporting the family, but I've always thought that as long as the family is at peace, that's all that matters. However, that peace was suddenly shattered. It started when my husband brought home a pregnant woman. Who is she? I asked, seeing her leaning on my husband. They clearly didn't seem like just friends. My mistress, Erica. She looked much younger. She and my 45-year-old husband were an odd match. How old is she?
She's 30. Young, right? She's way prettier than you, and finally, it's like spring has come for me.
But there's a 15-year age gap between you two.
When there's love, age doesn't matter.
But I wondered if that was really true. So, I want a divorce. Divorce? It was like a bolt from the blue. I had supported him all this time, and now he was suddenly declaring a divorce. Even though it was because of me that we were able to make ends meet. Could an unsuccessful artist really remarry with a younger woman?
Well, Erica's carrying my precious heir.
Heir? Yes.
What's the use of a woman who can't produce an heir?
What kind of legacy are you even talking about passing on? I wondered if he meant to pass on his unsuccessful art career. It's obvious. My father is the CEO of a company. That company needs an heir. And you couldn't give me a son. What? I was stunned. My husband had abandoned his family business, refusing to follow the path laid out by his parents. He's been drawing illustrations since his student days and got praised by friends for being good at it. He decided to live in the art world, against his parents' wishes. I married him to support his dream, but now he's talking about needing an heir. But you never cared about your parents' business. That was just youthful folly. I thought I didn't want a conventional life as a business owner, but being an artist is harder than I thought. Becoming a CEO seems easier. Plus, I'm the only heir. There's no one else, so I had to have a son. And you've been no help in that. You decided not to run the business, and now you want our child to do it? If he takes over, we'll be set for life. He'll be the CEO when he grows up, and I'll be living easy. But you said you didn't want to. I hated the idea, but now I see the appeal of being a CEO. But I can't give up art, so my child will be the heir. My father won't object to his grandson becoming CEO. It seems he's dreaming big again. He's always been a dreamer. Believing he'll be a famous illustrator, drawing every day without working. No matter how unsellable his art was, he kept saying having a goal is what makes life worth living. Now, he wants the child to be the CEO. Even though we have children?
Girls are no good. They just think about getting married. There's no point in investing in something so uncertain.
Is that how you've seen our daughters? Yes.
I've always thought girls are no good.
So that's why you took a mistress? It's more effective than having a woman who can only give birth to girls. I made a child with another woman to protect the company. It's all for preserving my father's business. That's ridiculous. What's so ridiculous?
Women are just a financial burden. No matter how you raise them, they end up with someone else.
A complete waste. So for the past 19 years, since our children were born, you've seen them as a waste?
Exactly. Girls are a waste.
Now I understand. When he learned our first child was a girl, he stopped coming home. He even tried to make me miscarry by making me carry heavy things during pregnancy. But she was born, and he didn't let me rest after giving birth. He made me do housework from the day I left the hospital. When we had our second child, he was careful until he found out it was a girl, then it was the same all over again. I couldn't even buy them pretty clothes. Because he said spending money on girls was pointless. I started working part-time, working hard for the kids. Seeing this, he stopped working entirely, even turning down illustration jobs he didn't like. I've endured because of my in-laws. They've always treated girls and boys equally, and they've been a great support. The only one who insisted that the heir had to be a boy was my ex-husband, Ken.
You get it, right? That's why we're getting divorced. You can have the kids.
All right, I understand. I replied. After signing the divorce papers, I told him.
I'm sorry for only being able to give birth to girls. I don't need alimony or child support. Just stay out of our lives. That works for me. Don't you bother me either.
He said, clearly pleased, and left with his mistress, Erica. 5 years later. At my father-in-law's 80th birthday party, all relatives gathered. Although I was divorced, my daughters were still his grandchildren. They had been invited, and so we went. There, we saw Ken with Erica and their 5-year-old son. When I saw Ken after a long time, he was dressed in a rather shabby manner, and his wife appeared equally impoverished. But their son was well cared for. "What are you doing here? You're not family," Ken snapped when he saw me. "Well, hello. I might not be family, but my daughters certainly are. They are your father's grandchildren, after all. I suppose you're just tagging along. Otherwise, you wouldn't be stepping foot in this house." "Maybe so. There's talk about the successor today. Not that it concerns you." "A successor?" "Well, I have 2 relatives here too. Girls can't be successors. My son will be the next CEO. We'll see about that," I said, dismissing his snide comment. As we sat down for dinner, toasts were made, and gifts were presented to my father-in-law. My daughters and I each had a present, while Ken only had a cheap tie to offer. After glancing at the tie Ken had given him, my father-in-law said, "Thank you," but then quickly set it aside, probably realizing it wasn't suitable for a CEO to wear. Then, he began to speak about his successor. "I'm 80 today. I should have named a successor and retired earlier, but it's time now, especially since my grandchildren are grown. Dad, my son should be the successor. He's only 5, but in 20 years, he'll be a fine young man. And it has to be a boy. But I'm 80 now. I can't wait another 20 years. But the CEO has to be a man. Girls won't do." "Well, I don't think that way. If they can work well, gender doesn't matter. Whoever can care for the employees and protect the company should be the CEO."
It won't work. A woman can't survive in a man's world. Most of our clients are men. Having a woman in charge will only bring trouble.
Ken was desperate, trying to change his father-in-law's mind about a female CEO. But I knew. My father-in-law had always believed that if a woman is capable, there's no problem. My daughters could very well become the CEOs. Contrary to that, my son is a boy. Just 20 more years. If you can't handle it, Dad, I can take over until then. What are you talking about? You can't possibly manage. You've never been involved in the business. I could if I wanted to. It's not a part-time job. Just then, a young man entered the room. He was dressed in an expensive suit and looked like a bright, promising young man. He approached my father-in-law, bowed deeply, and handed over a gift. "Thank you for inviting me, sir. I apologize for being late. I was worried the wine you like wouldn't arrive in time, but it just made it." It seemed the gift he handed over was the wine. My father-in-law smiled, pleased, and gestured for the young man to sit down. He sat next to my eldest daughter, Sally, and put his hand on her shoulder. "Sorry I'm late." "It's okay. Dad, I thought today was family only." "Ah, this is John Hudson. A capable executive in our company. At 30, he's made an exceptional rise to the executive board. But he's not family." "Surely, you're not thinking of making him the CEO? That's outrageous. The CEO has always been from the family. We should wait for my son to grow up. I've told you, I'm 80. I can't wait for your son to grow up. I'm opposed. If he's not family, who knows what he might do? Who will best ensure the company's prosperity? I've thought about it. You're not planning on making Sally's fiancé the CEO, are you? If they're both willing, I think that's the best option." Sally and Hudson exchanged smiles. Ken was furious.
"What are you saying? That's out of the question."
"Why is it so unacceptable?" "Well, as a father, I can't just hand my precious daughter over to some unknown man. We know exactly who he is. He's one of our executives. Still, how can I be sure my daughter will be happy with him? I'm speaking as a parent. I'm opposed to this marriage. Mirabelle, what do you think? I'm in favor. Hudson is an excellent man. He's efficient at work, caring, and very kind. He would be perfect as both Sally's husband and the CEO. Ken says he's thinking of Sally, but he doesn't know Hudson. He hasn't even seen Sally in 5 years. Someone like you doesn't have the right to dictate Sally's marriage. Well, that's true.
No, I'm her father. A father's opinion matters. What if Sally ends up unhappy? That would be terrible.
Ken, are you just making excuses?
Not at all. I can agree to the marriage, but not to him becoming the CEO.
That's odd. You were opposing the marriage for your child's sake, but now you say marriage is fine, but not him being CEO. It sounds like you just want your own son to be CEO. No, that's not it. It's just about waiting until my son can take over. That's doubtful. After all, he's your son. He'll probably want to carve his own path. And waiting for an uncertain future when we have someone capable here doesn't make sense.
It's too soon for such discussions, they're not even dating.
Actually, Sally and I are in a relationship. What? I thought so. You knew, didn't you? You even had your hand on Sally's shoulder earlier. I wanted to use this gathering to ask the president for his blessing for our marriage. That's underhanded. Using this meeting about the CEO to announce your marriage is too sly. I didn't know today would be about such important matters.
Lies. You knew all along.
Dad, I really didn't know. I just wanted to report our marriage to Grandpa. It's rare for us all to be together, so today seemed like the perfect timing.
Ridiculous. A marriage report without knowing? This is a conspiracy. You must have had plans to become CEO.
No, there was nothing like that.
I don't believe it. The next CEO will be my son, he's a blood relative.
Ken, you're being ridiculous. Our child's marriage and Hudson becoming CEO are two separate matters. No, Dad must have said if you marry, he'll make you CEO. That's why you proposed, right? Being the CEO's grandson-in-law is a great catch.
Dad, that's awful. Hudson isn't like that.
How would I know? Where did you even meet this guy? I introduced Sally to Hudson. What? To support the family, I worked part-time after having children. That part-time job was at your father's company. After the divorce, I became a full-time employee there. That's where I met Hudson, and I thought it would be wonderful if he married Sally. I see. When we divorced, you said you didn't need alimony or child support, but you were planning to marry Sally off to this guy, weren't you? There's no way I could have known that. No, knowing you, you must have schemed all this. If that's not the case, then agree to my son becoming the CEO. If you do, I'll admit it wasn't your plot. If your son is really yours, then it might be okay.
What? My son is definitely mine.
Well, we'll see about that. What are you saying? I've kept quiet until now, but if you're going to interfere with Sally's marriage that much, I guess I have no choice. Saying this, I handed a document to my father-in-law. What's this? It's the DNA test results of Ken and his son. Why do you have something like that? After we divorced, I heard some unsavory rumors about Erica. Unsavory rumors? Yes, about her having a history with many men. So, I decided to investigate. How did you manage that? It was simple. Erica would leave the child at daycare when meeting men. I got one of the daycare staff to obtain a sample. I believe it was his pacifier. We bought an identical one and swapped it. For Ken's sample, we used his semen. How did you get that? You're still quite active, it seems. I found out you were visiting brothels, so I asked one of the girls there. Of course, I paid her well. Thanks to that, we got a good sample. The test results showed a 99.9% chance they are not parent and child. You've been going to such places? You were fooling around with other men? I didn't spend money on my affairs. You're the one who paid for it.
A woman with other men is a bigger problem.
Both of you are just alike. But I thought, as long as the child grows up well, it's fine. However, after hearing today's discussion, I realized you're using the child for your own selfish desires. So, it's better to make things clear. If there's no blood relation, he can't be the successor, right? Then, the child can't be the heir.
What a mess. Why didn't it turn out like this? You said he was my son.
Well, you promised to marry me if I had a boy, and I happen to be pregnant with a boy. Besides, you said once he became the heir, we'd be rich. But after marrying, I realized you're extremely poor. You gave me all sorts of gifts before marriage, completely deceiving me. I was the one who was deceived. Still, I endured thinking our son would eventually become CEO since you said he was the only male child and guaranteed to become the CEO. Now this happens.
It's your fault. It's not just my problem. If he can't be the successor, then everything I've done was for nothing. You're the one who had a child with another man. If it were my child, there wouldn't be a problem. Enough. Blood relations aren't everything, nor is being a woman a problem. Women can certainly become successors. But in our family, there's no male or female fit for the CEO's chair. However, we have a granddaughter in a relationship with a competent employee. If they want to marry, it seems the next CEO is decided. Where's the problem in that? Stop making such a disgraceful scene.
I thought I finally had a son. If you hadn't run away from home against your parents' wishes, none of this would have happened. You misjudged your life choices and still act like a fool. I thought this would make me rich.
Fool!
The next day, Ken contacted me. I never expected Sally's partner to become the CEO. I thought only men in our family, my son and I, would be successors. You were fixated on the idea that only a man could do it. Did you really not think things through when you divorced me? Huh? When we divorced, you said you didn't need alimony or child support. Of course not. You insisted it had to be a boy, treated me horribly when I was pregnant, belittled me for 19 years, and were harsh to the children. Do you think I would simply wish for your happiness without any thought? Knowing how much I hated you? So that means? Of course, I wanted to make a fool out of you. Then why didn't you take alimony or demand child support? You should have, right? What use would it have been to claim anything from someone who clearly couldn't pay? I wanted to leave as the perfect wife, dropping you into a quagmire instead. I did want Sally to become the CEO, but she wasn't cut out for it. So, you set her up with this Hudson guy? Set up? That's a terrible way to put it. He's truly competent. For the company to prosper, we needed his abilities. And if he's CEO material, then Sally supporting him seemed right. They'll make a great couple. But, you know, even with the best plans, things don't always work out. I just introduced them, the rest was up to them. This all seems too convenient, doesn't it? It was fate. Eventually, he'll become the CEO, Sally will be the CEO's wife, and I'll be in the background.
Damn it! I'm going to expose all this to Dad.
Go ahead. Exposing it won't bother me. After all, management is about strategy. Your father is a businessman, right? He understands these things. How underhanded can you be? It's not underhanded, it's strategy. You lost because you had no plan and chased dreams. I prepared everything to the very end. The very end? I knew you'd interfere with Sally's relationship with Hudson. So, I kept the DNA test results ready. You had it prepared for yesterday's revelation 5 years in advance? Obviously not that far ahead. I couldn't foresee 5 years into the future. But when I saw the results, I knew they'd be a useful card someday. So I kept them safe. I see. So, your game ends when Sally marries Hudson and he becomes CEO. Trying to sabotage Sally's marriage? Those two won't break up. How can you be so sure? Hudson's a man, after all. I've checked everything about him. He's not a cheater like you, nor does he visit brothels. A clean, decent man. His only flaw might be that he's a workaholic. Such a man sounds boring. Better than someone like you who doesn't work and just plays around. Anyway, there's still the vice president's position. But finding a husband for Julie from within the company might be tough. Oh, I'm not done yet. What do you mean? You're assuming Julie will be easy to handle because she's a woman, but she has the makings of an executive. She doesn't need an exceptional partner. Are you planning not to let her marry? Someone supportive and helpful at home would be ideal. She'll find someone like that. But can such a marriage be happy? They won't make a living. They will. Julie will be the vice president. Vice president? Julie is a woman, you know? A man who understands and supports her work would be perfect. Even someone who's willing to be a stay-at-home husband. That's not a man. Better than someone who doesn't work properly and only draws unsuccessful illustrations. Damn it! But who knows if Julie will really become the vice president? A woman is just a woman, after all. If she finds someone she loves, she'll want to get married. Think what you want, but Julie has me. Your children have a parent who doesn't understand management. You understand management? Yes, no need to worry. I've learned a lot from your father. I'm not in the family business, but I understand the company better than you ever will. But my child will someday. Impossible. My final goal is to completely knock you out of the succession race. That was your real intention? Of course. A person who ridicules others and can't strategize doesn't deserve to be CEO. And I wanted to see you, who looked down on women, lose to one. That's why I continued working at your father's company even after our divorce, searching for a suitable successor. When I found one, I introduced him to Sally. Damn! You thought that far ahead. That's why you can't beat me. I said. Afterward, Ken divorced Erica. They both betrayed each other, apparently. Since the 5-year-old son wasn't Ken's, Erica took him and demanded child support this time. Ken, now alone, tried to return home. But he was rejected by his family for leaving without any plan and not listening to them. They even scolded him, saying, a man should stick to his decisions. Without a home or income, Ken struggled to survive. He tried to find a woman to at least have a place to live. But, being neither handsome nor wealthy, found no one. He lived off his mistress's earnings and now didn't know how to live alone. His apartment turned into a garbage dump. And his application for welfare was denied. He thought of turning to Sally, now the CEO's wife. But she wouldn't help after he tried to interfere with her marriage. So, Ken, unable to rely on anyone, lived a tough life as an unsuccessful illustrator. As for me, my eldest daughter married, and Hudson became CEO. My youngest daughter, Julie, joined my father-in-law's company after graduating from college. She's enjoying her work every day. And will likely help lead the company alongside the CEO someday. I look forward to that day and keep working hard. Mom's inheritance, that house, right? How do we divide it? Huh? When Mom fell ill, I checked the whole house, but there didn't seem to be anything valuable in it. Are you thinking to continue living there? If that is the case, I won't get anything from it. Wait a moment. You can't just spring this on me all of a sudden. We've had 6 months to think about it, so it's not all of a sudden, is it? And then, here's what I've thought. The house is old, and I think it's becoming unsafe to live in soon. Even if we renovate the house, it'll be cost so much money because it's a big rural house. So, why not demolish the house and sell the land instead? The land is spacious, so I think it will fetch a decent amount of money, and it will be easier to divide once we have cash on hand. My mother had just passed away, and not even 2 seconds had passed since we left the hospital room. My sister had started talking about the inheritance distribution as if it were the most natural thing to do. It was inappropriate to have that sort of conversation yet. People have many different emotions, but at that moment, anger surpassed them all. My sister's words triggered a wave of anger on top of my sadness.
Are you fine with me taking everything that's left in the house? You're single, so you don't really need that much money, right? But that would be too unfair. How about this? You can have the rundown shed in the garden. You can have whatever is in there. We'll split the land between the two of us, so let's share the cost of demolishing the house equally. But I am giving you the shed, so you'll have to cover the cost of its demolition on your own.
I had so much to say about my sister. But right now, my priority was my mother.
Fine, I agree. Really? Yay! Thank you.
As soon as I accepted my sister's demands, she didn't even try to return to the room where our mother was in. Rather, she left the hospital with a spring in her step. It seemed like our mother was nothing more than a piggy bank to her. My anger continued to become bigger and bigger inside me. However, when my sister was gone, I surprised myself by immediately agreeing to demolish our childhood home and sell the land. Later on, I realized that my quick decision was a way for our parents to push me to be responsible for my sister in their absence. The realization came when I was clearing out the rundown shed that my sister had pushed onto me, and I discovered a hidden safe that I had never seen before. My name is Holly. I'm 48 years old and work as a caregiver. As I've gotten older, I've noticed that more and more people around me finishing raising their children and spending quality time with their partners. I'm not one of those people, though. I am still single and have been living in my rural childhood home. 5 years ago, my father passed away from an illness, so now it's just my mother, Anna, and me living together. Despite that I am almost turning to 50, I have no experience with raising children or enjoying the company of a partner. People sometimes give me a pity look when they hear I'm single and almost 50, but I don't mind being alone at all. In my early 20s, I did get married, but my husband turned out to be a complete deadbeat, and he cheated on me just a year after our wedding. Why did I marry such a man? If you were going to get divorced so soon, wouldn't it have been better not to get married in the first place? Some people might think that. I certainly do. Back then, I was in my early 20s, so I can only chalk it up to youthful foolishness. It's truly a dark chapter in my life. The only silver lining is that we didn't have any children. Well, considering that, I've made up my mind never to marry again. However, the only regret I have about being single is that I can't show my child's face to my mother. But showing my mother her grandchild's face is something that can be done by someone other than me.
Mom, I'm back. Welcome home. Must have been tiring coming from so far away. Oh, yes. On Christmas, it is always so crowded and hectic. Holly, could you make some tea, please?
I have a sister named Margaret. Unlike me, she's married and has children. When my nephew was young, she used to bring him to our family home and show him to my mother. I used to look forward to playing with my nephew. However, Margaret only brings my nephew to our family home on Christmas. Her husband works in the restaurant and he is busy even on Christmas, so it's always just Margaret and my nephew who visit us. My mother and I would have liked to see my nephew more, but we didn't want to bother my sister, so we kept quiet about it. Even though it's only once a year, we're grateful that they show their face. However, even that stopped when my nephew entered college. Once you're a college student, you might start feeling reluctant to come all the way to the countryside on Christmas. It's unavoidable, but for the past 20 years or so, we had seen my nephew's face at least once a year, so my mother and I feel disappointed that we haven't seen him for the past 5 or 6 years. Since my nephew stopped coming to our house, it's not like I haven't seen Margaret either.
Mom, I've come to visit. How are you doing?
Margaret, like a child, kicks off her shoes at the entrance and ignores me as she hurries into the house. I straighten out her shoes and then head back into the house. In contrast to her Christmas visits with my nephew, Margaret now comes back irregularly once a year without any connection to the holiday and talks to my mother with a smile on her face. Her actions are like a picture-perfect example of filial piety. However, when my nephew isn't around, both my mother and I can't help but force a smile. As I enter the living room, Margaret is massaging my mother's shoulders and speaking with a smile.
Mom, I really want something.
What is it this time? Well, recently, our coffee maker broke down. We can't do without our morning coffee in our household, so now the whole family is grumpy in the mornings. If we continue like this, it could lead to a family breakdown.
You're still as dramatic as ever. How much is this thing going to cost? Around $600, I guess?
My mother sighed in exasperation, and I couldn't help but let out a sigh too. Margaret, on her own, is in high spirits, and she gazes at my mother with a smile. She often asks my mother for money. When my father was alive, she used to pester him for money as well. The reason my sister used to bring my nephew back on Christmas was not just for the Christmas presents he received from my parents and me, it was also an opportunity for her to ask for money and things. However, since my nephew stopped coming home, she no longer insists on adhering to the Christmas timing and started coming irregularly to our house. I'd say there's a 99.9% chance that when she comes home, she'll ask my mother for money. The only time I can recall my sister not asking for money during her visits was when her husband caught a cold on Christmas, and she left my nephew with us, rushing back to her own home. That happened only once. My sister works part-time, and since she's married, she doesn't have much disposable income. I can understand her desire to lean on our parents a bit. However, she has no reservations about asking for money, which can be quite troublesome. This time, she's planning to buy a coffee maker. While it would be sufficient to get one for around $200, she wants to purchase an expensive one that costs $600. She's 52 years old now. And constantly asking for money like a child isn't an ideal situation. Sometimes, I try to caution her. Margaret, couldn't you buy the coffee maker by yourself? And asking for $600, isn't that a bit extravagant? Well, Mom said it's okay, so it's fine. Besides, you wouldn't understand, being single and living with our parents. Having a family comes with various financial responsibilities. It's not like you, Holly, who can use your entire salary for yourself. My sister has no shame about asking for money from my mother, and my attempts to caution her don't seem to have any effect. Behind my sister's back, my mother often wears a troubled expression and gestures with her right hand. As if to say, just let it go, don't say anything more. If my mother gives her instructions, I have no choice but to back down. It's a routine. My sister was the type who would throw a tantrum if her demands weren't met when she was a child. If she wanted a certain doll at a toy store and our parents initially refused, she would cry and sit there for tens of minutes, shouting and attracting the attention of other customers until our parents couldn't bear the embarrassment and eventually bought her the doll. Of course, she doesn't throw tantrums like that anymore. But if my mother hesitates about giving her money, my sister will persistently cling to her.
Oh, by the way, the coffee maker I'm planning to buy comes with a stainless steel milk frother and cups for cappuccino. It's a good deal to get them together. Could you give me money for that too? Huh? How much is that set going to cost? About $200. Do you really need to buy that set to use the coffee maker? At least pay for the set yourself.
Even though she had just received $600, she immediately asked for an additional $200, causing my mother to wear a stern expression. Understanding that she'll be pestered, my mother hastily left the living room for the kitchen, even though she had no reason to be there. My sister stuck to my mother's back closely, saying, "Just $200 more." Ignoring her, my mother began preparing tea, probably not wanting to engage further. I watched their exchange, considering it as the usual routine, and moved a little away from them, observing with a cool detachment.
Don't ignore me. I heard that with those milk containers, you can make delicious cappuccinos and lattes.
Mom returned with tea, but my sister didn't leave her side.
And those cups are designed so that coffee doesn't cool down quickly.
My mother appeared uneasy with my sister clinging to her, so she left the steaming tea untouched and headed towards the restroom. My sister followed her, speaking toward the bathroom door.
I'm thinking of using those cups for guests since they have a stylish design. You know, we can't serve coffee to guests in tacky cups, can we? Well, I guess you have a point. All right then.
When my mother emerged from the bathroom, she succumbed to my sister's persistence, giving her the additional $200. This is why my mother stopped me from cautioning my sister. If I were to caution her and not give her the money, it would only prolong the time my sister pesters my mother. If my sister's requests were denied, she would become very clingy. In this case, with an amount of $200, it was resolved within about 10 minutes. However, about 20 years ago, when my sister demanded a larger amount of money for her education, this pestering lasted for a whole week. During that time, my sister stayed over at our parents' house and relentlessly continued her requests, ignoring time and place, even when our parents were in the bathroom, taking a bath, eating, or sleeping. After a week of being persistently pestered, our parents' mental state had deteriorated, and they ultimately gave in to my sister's demands. During that incident, I couldn't help but admire my sister beyond exasperation. The next morning, my sister left, humming a tune, after receiving the money for the coffee maker. While it's not a reason to praise her, my sister does visit our parents' house and ask for money only about once a year. Moreover, despite all the fuss, she doesn't demand unreasonable amounts. Considering how much she relies on our parents, I believe she truly values our mother. Since our mother also approves, I refrain from getting too involved in my sister's actions. 6 months after my sister's visit. It was still too early for her next homecoming, but I had called her to come back.
Mom has fallen ill. Can you come right away?
Upon receiving the call, my sister flew over the same day. I was reassured, thinking that she indeed cared for our mother. My sister and I listened to the doctor's explanation, and it was mostly as we had expected. Our mother is turning 80 this year. I don't want to say it out loud, but that's what it amounts to. As our mother needed to be hospitalized, my sister and I decided to return home. When we arrived home and saw the living room empty without our mother, I felt a sense of loneliness.
I can't stay in this house, so Mom will rely on you more, Holly. Become more dependable.
My sister tried to encourage me, noticing my somewhat forlorn expression. Her choice of words bothered me a little, but she must be quite shaken as well. My sister's awkward attempt at encouragement made me feel slightly more optimistic. However, the following morning, something happened that made me doubt whether my sister's words of encouragement were truly meant for me.
Sis, what are you doing? Huh? I'm not doing anything special. Just looking for my smartphone, it's gone missing. I have an idea where it might be, so don't worry.
When I woke up, my sister was wandering around the house. It seemed like she was checking drawers, closets, and such, but it didn't look like she was searching for her smartphone at all. Even by noon, my sister continued to roam around the house. Sis, lunch is ready.
Got it. I'm coming back now.
I called out loudly from inside the house to my sister, who was in the barn in the yard. She was looking at her smartphone screen. My sister's behavior seemed a bit odd. But considering the situation with our mother, I decided not to dwell on it. She left without any incident later that evening. 6 months later, we received a call from the hospital saying that our mother's condition had worsened, so my sister and I headed to the hospital. When we entered the hospital room, our mother was unconscious and couldn't engage in conversation anymore. However, the nurse assured us that she could still hear our voices. So, I continued to tell her childhood memories. 3 hours later, our mother passed away. I had been prepared for this for the past 6 months, and knowing that she would now be with our father, I managed to keep my composure despite the overwhelming sadness. However, any lapse in concentration threatened to unleash a flood of tears and drive me to madness. Perhaps sensing my vulnerability, my sister put her arm around my shoulder and led me outside the hospital room. In the hallway, I took a deep breath to regain some composure. My sister was watching my face. I thought she was trying to say something comforting, but the words that came out of her mouth were completely unexpected. "What about Mom's inheritance? That house is the only valuable thing, right? How should we divide it?"
Huh?
My thoughts came to a screeching halt at my sister's completely unexpected words. My mind went blank, unable to think about anything, and even my sorrow faded to white. My mind had stopped working, and I couldn't find words to respond. My sister proceeded to talk.
"When Mom fell ill and I checked the house, there was nothing that seemed valuable, you know. Are you going to continue living in that house? If so, I won't have anything left to inherit."
Hey, wait a minute, don't spring that on me all of a sudden. People usually discuss these things ahead of time, right? It's been 6 months, so it's not sudden. So, I've been thinking about it. The house is old, and I think it's becoming unsafe for you to keep living there. Even if you renovate, it's a big old house in the countryside, so it would cost a lot of money. So, what if we just demolish the house and sell the land? The land is quite spacious, so it should fetch a good price, and it would be easier to divide that way, don't you think? My mother had just passed away, and not even 20 seconds had passed since we left the hospital room. My sister had started talking about the inheritance distribution as if it were the most natural thing to do. It was inappropriate to have that sort of conversation yet. People have many different emotions, but at that moment, anger surpassed them all. My sister's words added a layer of intense anger on top of my sadness.
"Can I have everything that's left in the house?
Holly, you're single, so you don't really need that much money, right?
But it would be too unfair if I took everything.
So, you can have that old shed in the backyard. I'll give you what's in there." My sister wore a smug expression, blatantly defying my anger. It seemed like her plan was to take the bank book and cash for herself while selling the furniture and appliances for some extra cash. The main prize, of course, was the money from selling the land, but she also intended to push the responsibility of cleaning up the rundown backyard shed onto me.
"We'll split the land evenly, so let's share the cost of demolishing the house. But you can handle the demolition cost of that old shack in the backyard on your own since it's yours," she added with a grin.
It seemed my initial hunch was correct. I had a lot of complaints to share with my sister after all. However, rejecting her demands at this point would likely lead to her pestering me relentlessly. Dealing with a substantial asset like the land was sure to become a hassle. Moreover, my mother's situation was the most pressing concern right now. "Fine, I understand," I said reluctantly.
"Really? Yay! Thanks."
Without returning to the hospital room where our mother was, my sister left the area with a spring in her step. I decided to prioritize my mother's situation over my feelings towards my sister and accepted her demands on the spot. It seemed that, for my sister, our mother was nothing more than a piggy bank. My anger grew bigger inside me. However, when my sister was gone, I surprised myself by immediately agreeing to demolish our childhood home and sell the land. Looking back, I think that my hasty decision was, in a way, a push from my parents to scold my sister on their behalf. After my mother's funeral, we decided to discuss the formal inheritance process at my mother's memorial party. In the meantime, I began to tackle the cleanup of the old shed. Later on, my sister, perhaps wanting to avoid the topic of splitting the demolition cost for the shed, brought a handwritten document containing the details of our conversation outside the hospital room and asked me to sign it. I wanted to lose my temper and argue, thinking about it later, but at that moment, I was filled with irritation. Recalling that, I started to feel a hint of frustration while cleaning up the ramshackle shed. Given that my sister had handed them off to me, everything in the barn was nothing but dusty and scattered items. The barn itself was in shambles, with walls and pillars in a dilapidated state. I couldn't help but think that one good kick on a pillar could bring the whole thing crashing down. As I started to clean up the shed, I found several items. I hoped they might be valuable, but I couldn't find their market value online. Antique valuations, unlike those for games or branded items, usually required proper appraisal, making it impossible to research easily online. Also, even if something looked expensive, most of it was practically worthless. My sister seemed to have reached the same conclusion after checking online valuations for the shed's contents. I had no complaints if it meant getting rid of the vases. But there was one big problem.
How do I even dispose of this?
I am already too exhausted to tackle this problem. As I gazed upon it, all I could do was sigh deeply. There was a quite old car in the shed that seemed impossible to move. It had been covered with a car cover for a long time, so despite some rust, it looked surprisingly clean, considering it had been abandoned for decades. However, it was not worth the high cost of repairs, and it wasn't something I had any intention of driving. Since this seemed like it would take some time, I decided to leave it for last. As I continued cleaning up the shed, a dusty safe emerged from the corner. It stood about knee-high and was about the width of one arm. A classic black safe with a dial that one might commonly see on TV or in manga. Of course, there was no key, and I couldn't see what was inside. Furthermore, it was too heavy for me to move on my own. As more troublesome items emerged after the car, I once again found myself in a predicament. However, I suddenly remembered watching a TV show where they attempted to open a locked safe. In that program, a locksmith had successfully opened a safe. While it turned out to be empty, the safe itself seemed to have value, and the locksmith offered a decent sum to buy it. Though the safe in front of me didn't appear to have any value, I couldn't help but be curious about its contents. So, with a bit of excitement, I contacted a locksmith. The locksmith arrived an hour later, and to my disappointment, the safe was opened quite easily in about 10 minutes. It turned out to be a safe made around 40 years ago, and its mechanism wasn't overly complicated. With no great expectations for its contents, I opened the safe. Inside, I found a single picture. I glanced at it briefly and saw that it featured illustrations of the life of medieval people.
It was inside the safe, so it might be valuable.
What do you think? I added, trying to appear uncertain. In reality, I had already decided to have an antique dealer take a look at it. While I didn't have high hopes for obscure vases and tea utensils, I didn't want to waste the effort if they turned out to be entirely worthless. Besides, if I called in an appraiser for trash, I'd feel embarrassed. However, since I had found a scroll tucked away in the safe, it was worth having an antique dealer assess it. I called a dealer specializing in antique items with a sense of excitement. The next day, the dealer came for a house call due to the quantity of items. It turned out that the picture was the work of a famous artist. Though the actual appraisal value was only $1,000. It wasn't the several million or billion dollars you might see on TV. But it was still a respectable sum. Following the picture, other items came from shed. I kept getting other items appraised one after another. Things that he had thought were worthless were getting price tags of thousands of dollars one after another. After appraising the other items from the shed, the total value of the antiques came to around $3,000. They also agreed to take the items that had no appraisal value. However, they would keep the antiques in their possession for a while, and the formal purchase would take place after the inheritance discussions and paperwork were completed. Nevertheless, clearing out the shed was a breeze after they took away the items. As everything was assessed, and I was about to bid the dealer goodbye with a feeling of satisfaction, they asked me a question.
Is that the car covered up over there?
Yes, it is. It's a beat-up one that I plan to get rid of. What caught the attention of the appraiser was the dilapidated car left in the shed. After removing the cover once, I had been too lazy to put it back on neatly, so it had become quite haphazardly covered. As a result, some parts of the car were visible. Hey, that car might actually be valuable, you know? But that car is in terrible shape, rusted in spots, and practically unusable. Well, I'm just saying, it's probably a popular model among vintage car enthusiasts. I can introduce you to a friend who owns a garage. How about having them take a look? From the locksmith to the appraiser, and from the appraiser to the car dealer, more and more people involved with the barn were connected. Sometimes, things like this were a matter of fate, and perhaps I could save myself the trouble of disposing of the car. With that in mind, I made a call to the recommended car dealer. The next day, the car dealer came to my house. When the car dealer saw the car, their eyes widened for a moment, and they began to inspect the inside and the underside of the car. After about 30 minutes, the car dealer told me something shocking. This car is actually a domestically produced model that was popular among enthusiasts about 40 years ago. The condition isn't that bad, and I'd be willing to buy it for $50,000. What? $50,000? I was so surprised that my eyes felt like they were popping out of my head. With this amount, I could cover the demolition costs of both the shed and the house. I felt grateful for the connections I had made with the locksmith and the car dealer. However, the tailwind for me wasn't over yet. I hope this isn't rude, but is it okay to sell this car? Did it belong to your father? Well, it did belong to my father, but he's not here anymore, so it's fine. Actually, my mother passed away recently too, and I'm in the process of cleaning up the house. However, with the car valued at $50,000, my sister might have some objections. In that case, it might be a good idea to consult with a lawyer. A lawyer, huh? About 2 weeks later, after my mother's memorial party, my sister and I decided to have a discussion about the inheritance. As for the distribution of the inheritance, it's fine the way we discussed before, right? So, shall we decide on a schedule for disposing of the belongings and demolishing the house? Sis, can I confirm one thing before that? What? The shed is going to be mine, right? That's right. Why are you bringing this up now? We even signed the paperwork on the day of the funeral. You know you have to cover the demolition costs for the shed, right? I'm not questioning that. I just wanted to make sure. You see, the antiques from the shed were worth $3,000, and the car is worth $50,000. What did you say? My sister was so astonished that her jaw looked like it might unhinge. I could understand her feelings because I felt like my eyeballs were about to pop out too. No one could have imagined that a treasure was hidden in that rundown old barn. I've been thinking, maybe we should divide the barn equally after all? It wouldn't be fair otherwise, right? Upon learning that what came out of the barn I had reluctantly taken responsibility for amounted to $53,000, my sister quickly changed her tune. I, who had been handed the barn, was not going to agree to her proposal. You mean to break the promise you made with me in writing? That's... Although my sister was usually quite stubborn and wouldn't budge until her demands were met, this time, she had already gotten her way. Therefore, she couldn't argue about the barn, and she reluctantly conceded to my logical argument. It's okay, really. It's just $53,000. There was about $20,000 in Mom's savings. Besides, I'd be satisfied with getting half of the money from selling this house's land. When I checked, this house's land is roughly 1,000 square yards, and the market price is about $20,000. Since we'll split the demolition costs in half, I should end up with about $60,000, $80,000. That should be more than enough. In dramas and movies, you often see scenes where people fight over inheritances worth tens of millions of dollars or large houses. However, in reality, it's often on this scale. It's still a significant amount, considering it exceeds $200,000. Nonetheless, as I watched my sister, who was desperately haggling over $60,000, $80,000, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. I wondered how our parents would feel if they saw our current conversation. Perhaps they knew that my sister would end up in this situation and secretly guided me to make various decisions and establish connections with different people. Thinking about this, I felt that I needed to put our parents' minds at ease. Unfortunately, sis, that $60,000 you're planning to take will go to me instead. What? What are you talking about? Sis, about 20 years ago, didn't you say you wanted to build a house because you were having a child and you got a down payment from mom and dad?
Oh, yeah. I remember that. It took me a week of pestering, but they finally gave me the money back then. I really worked hard for it.
The money you received back then was $60,000, right? Apparently, that falls under special benefit.
What? What does that mean?
My sister, who already had an inkling of what was going on, couldn't meet my eyes and looked away. I decided to consult with the lawyer recommended by the car dealer. The story that came up was about special benefit. There were various conditions, but in essence, if you had received money or property like land in advance, it would be subtracted from the inheritance before dividing the estate. It was a matter of fairness. So, my sister received a whopping $60,000 as funds for buying the house from our parents, but I didn't get any. Therefore, when it comes to dividing the inheritance, it's unfair if I don't get an extra $60,000.
Come on. If I give you $60,000, I'll be left with nothing. Don't forget you have $53,000 from the barn, right? Can't that count as my share?
I just checked earlier, you know? Whether I can have the barn stuff or not. So, the barn is a completely separate matter. What we're dividing here is the land, isn't it? Well then, I won't get any money. Moreover, I'll have to pay at least $20,000 for the demolition of the house, even if we split it. I think you'll have to pay more than $20,000.
Impossible! I won't pay $20,000 when I won't get anything in return.
Well, there's a better solution. You can take nothing, and I'll take everything, the house and the land.
That's not fair at all. If Holly is getting the house and the land, you should give me something too. You're saying that, even though you pushed the decrepit old barn onto me? Let me make it clear that I have no intention of yielding on this condition. Now, choose. Either back down without getting anything, or pay me $20,000 to demolish this house.
Naturally, my sister had no choice but to back down. She wore a frustrated expression as she left the house. And so, I successfully protected the house without giving anything to my sister. After this incident, it's unlikely that she will come to the house for a while. Therefore, I won't have to deal with her persistently asking me for something again. I clasped my hands in front of the family altar, reporting to my parents in the afterlife that I managed not to give anything to my sister and thanking them for orchestrating this turn of events. A few days later, I received a phone call from my sister's husband, who apologized to me. It turned out that my sister had hidden both her requests for money from our mother and this inheritance matter from the family. Additionally, the reason my nephew had stopped coming around when he became a college student was not because he didn't want to visit his family. When he became a college student, we stopped giving him Christmas presents. Therefore, my sister used the promise of Christmas presents as leverage to ask our mother for money. She thought there was no point in bringing him along on Christmas anymore, as he wouldn't be receiving anything. My nephew apparently learned about this situation for the first time during our recent discussions about the inheritance. Furthermore, regarding the inheritance matter, she had been recklessly spending money, thinking she would get around $60,000. It was an irrational behavior to assume that she could spend that money before actually receiving it. Although she didn't spend the full $60,000, my sister had used up more than $20,000 of the family's money in the past month. Both my nephew and her husband gave her a stern talking to when they found out that she had used my nephew as a pawn to ask our mother for money and had depleted $20,000 of the family's money. Now, she has become quite humble, reflecting on her actions. I believe this outcome is the result of our parents coming from the afterlife to give my sister an advantage. With no need to demolish the house anymore, I still live in my childhood home. I converted the treasure from the barn into cash and set it aside for future house repairs. Additionally, my nephew, now a working adult, occasionally comes to visit. Today, I'm thankful for the peaceful days I get to enjoy without any trouble and offer my prayers in front of the family altar. Holding my youngest daughter Emily in my arms, I was dozing off when my husband Benjamin suddenly raised his voice as he returned home.
Hey! Your husband came home from work and you're napping so carefree?
My second daughter Olivia jumped up in shock, while my eldest daughter Natalie stood beside her, glaring at their father. I'm sorry. I tried to stand up, but I felt dizzy and stumbled. Benjamin sneered at me and took out an envelope.
I've been thinking of having you, a lazy wife like you, leave this house.
Sign this and get out quickly. The content of the envelope he was grinning while holding out was a divorce paper. My face twisted in frustration.
At least, let me take the kids with me. I can't trust someone like you with the kids. Please, at least that.
Clinging to his legs, I pleaded with him. Then he pushed Olivia towards me. You can take this one and the baby. But you can't have Natalie, he said, grabbing Natalie from behind in a chokehold.
No! Let her go!
She's quite useful to me. I'll take good care of her. I tried to pull Natalie away from Benjamin, but he pushed me away. Hey, Natalie.
If you don't obey me quietly, who knows what I'll do to your mom?
He was threatening Natalie using me. How could he?
If you care about Natalie, you'll leave right away.
With those words, he left the house. I hugged my crying children and started packing.
I'm sorry, Natalie. I promise, I'll come back for you.
I hugged her tightly, spending our last night together. My name is Scarlett Brown. I live with my husband Benjamin, my mother-in-law, and our 3 daughters, a normal housewife who works part-time 3 or 4 days a week. I met Benjamin at work where I was a full-time employee when we got married. Though we were in different departments, everything went smoothly from dating to marriage. 3 months into our marriage, Benjamin made a proposal.
I'd really like to have 3 kids.
He often showed his fondness for children, so I knew someday we might have our own. But I was worried about balancing work and parenting.
I've thought about it too, but we just got married, right? Plus, I'm handling a big project at work.
Expressing my concerns only made me more anxious. Seeing my worried look, Benjamin reassured me, don't worry. They're my kids too. I won't let you handle all the parenting alone. I felt so grateful to have married such a kind man and began to cherish the thought of raising his children. A year later, when our first daughter Natalie was born, Benjamin, true to his word, took the lead in caring for her. I was on parental leave and tried my best not to overburden him. However, when Natalie was 3 months old, Benjamin's business trips began to increase.
There's not much I can do about this.
Sure, it's work, I understood that. But before I could even bring it up, Benjamin seemed uneasy. I was only grateful to him and couldn't understand why he was avoiding eye contact.
It's okay. I won't complain. Just help out when you can, within your limits.
Hearing this, Benjamin smiled with relief.
Of course, I'll do that,
he said, bowing his head jokingly. Parenting can be tough, but if we can keep laughing together like this, I know we can get through it. I was feeling grateful for these happy moments.
I'll watch Natalie today. Why don't you go out and relax a bit?
One day, my mother-in-law, with whom we lived, suggested this, so I decided to go out for a meal with a colleague. Benjamin was away on a business trip and wouldn't be home that day. I planned to buy some pastries as a thank you for my mother-in-law and have tea with her tomorrow. With that idea, I bought some pastries at a bakery and headed to meet my colleague. Lost in the familiar streets, I thought I saw Benjamin, but he quickly disappeared into the crowd. He said he was on a business trip, maybe I was mistaken. Without dwelling on it, I hurried to the meeting place. Catching up with my colleague after a long time, I got home just before the date changed. My mother-in-law had already put Natalie to bed and was taking a break.
Mother-in-law, I'm sorry. I got back late.
I apologized, bowing my head. She smiled back kindly at me. She's a woman of few words, but she didn't seem angry or annoyed. I shrugged apologetically, and my mother-in-law said with a laugh, feel free to tell me anytime. I've never taken care of a girl before, so it's fun for me. The next day, I gave my mother-in-law the thank you pastries, and as we were having tea together, she asked me a question I'd never heard before. "What kind of person is Benjamin to you, Scarlett?" I was surprised she would ask about her own son, but I honestly shared my feelings. I told her he was kind, understanding of my emotions. We do have our fights occasionally, but he always apologizes sincerely. She just nodded as she listened, then casually remarked, "To me, he's always been incredibly selfish, arrogant, and can get quite emotional." I had never known that side of him. Noticing my surprise, she said, "Benjamin changed after meeting you, Scarlett. He's become kinder to me too," she said with a warm smile, thanking me for changing Benjamin and asking for my continued support. Her hand was warm as she held mine, but there was a firm strength in her grip. When Natalie turned 1, I went back to work on a part-time basis. I had thought Benjamin would start helping out more with housework and childcare once I resumed work, but that wasn't the case. Natalie was an easy child, so I didn't feel too burdened and didn't press him for help, but my reliance on my mother-in-law increased, which worried me. When I talked to Benjamin about it, he replied indifferently, "Mom's always at home, she doesn't mind doing that much." This must be the arrogance my mother-in-law was talking about. I couldn't keep relying on her so much, so when Natalie turned 2 and started daycare, I was relieved. Returning to a regular work schedule, my days became a whirlwind. I wanted to ask Benjamin to at least help with daycare drop-offs and pickups, but he was often too busy with early meetings or client dinners, so I decided to handle it myself. Whenever Natalie got suddenly sick, I was the one who had to take leave. Feeling increasingly cornered by the constant thoughts of "why is it always me?" and yearning for just a little bit of understanding. I tried to talk to Benjamin one night while lying in bed. "Hey, Benjamin." But without even looking at me, he sighed and said coldly, "I have an early start tomorrow. Give me a break." What if Natalie wakes up? I was shocked. Day after day, I was caught up in work, household chores, and childcare, with no one to help me. Silently, I let the tears flow, careful not to let Benjamin notice. Soon, I could hear his snoring beside me. The next day, noticing my lack of energy, my mother-in-law said, "Scarlett, I'm feeling pretty good today, so I'll pick up Natalie. I'll also prepare dinner." Natalie was clearly happy, but there was no reaction from Benjamin, who had seen the exchange. I felt my feelings for him cooling. Benjamin had stopped helping around the house, but at night, he would seek my company. Honestly, I was too exhausted from work and childcare to even think about it. I had refused once, but he got so upset that I reluctantly agreed afterward. When I found out I was pregnant with our second child, I was also up for a promotion. I knew Benjamin wouldn't help with childcare or housework. Between children and work, I knew I had to choose the children. I understood that, but lying on the couch, carelessly watching TV and laughing, not showing any concern for me during my pregnancy, I felt hatred towards Benjamin for the first time. Even after the birth of our second daughter, Olivia, he seemed completely uninterested. He would take Natalie to the park, but he wouldn't even change Olivia's diapers. Over these 5 years, I hadn't realized how gradually Benjamin had changed, becoming too familiar in our daily life. And I hadn't realized how much my own feelings for him had cooled. Since Olivia's birth, Benjamin stopped coming home even on weekends. Was his department that busy, or was it because he had somewhat advanced in his career? I had no way of knowing. Deciding that working full-time was impossible, I had resigned from my job. When I went to my workplace for the last time to complete the resignation process, I saw that a colleague had become the section manager. That should have been my desk. I felt a wave of envy clinging to me. Even though we're still friends, I felt disgusted with myself for harboring such feelings. Being quick to adapt was supposed to be my strong suit. After finishing the paperwork, I hurried back home to my beloved children, feeling like I was shaking something off. Concerned that Benjamin's earnings alone were not enough, I consulted with my mother-in-law and decided to take a part-time job as a cashier at a nearby supermarket. I would work about 5 hours, 3 or 4 days a week. And around that time, Benjamin's attitude began to change again. While I was preparing dinner, Benjamin came home and suddenly yelled out loud.
I come home tired from work and this is the meal you prepare?
I was baffled by his sudden anger. Natalie was frightened, and Olivia started crying from the loudness of his voice.
Enough. Quiet her down already. What in the world are you yelling about at this time?
My mother-in-law's gentle tone, as she came to see what the fuss was about, seemed to slightly ease the situation. But Benjamin responded with a disrespectful tone.
Mom, just keep quiet. I'm disciplining her because she can't do anything right.
His manner of speaking had changed as if he was a different person. My mother-in-law couldn't say anything more, just bowed her head apologetically to me and returned to her room. Wondering what the problem was, I checked the dinner dishes on the table. The only difference from usual was that there were some ready-made side dishes.
Is it about these supermarket side dishes? I got them for myself to eat. Don't make excuses.
He interrupted me mid-sentence with a shout. His fierceness was so intimidating that Natalie almost started crying again. This was getting nowhere. I decided to just endure it. After his tirade, he said as if spitting out the words, "I'm going to eat out tonight. And I'll go straight to work tomorrow," and then he left the house. It felt like the calm after a storm. Who was that just now? My husband used to be kinder, not someone who yells. In my days, I remembered what my mother-in-law had said that day. Selfish, arrogant, and emotional. Was she timing it, or did she just know? She came over and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry." Her faint voice echoed emptily. All I could do was hug my 2 daughters. From that day, whenever Benjamin did come home, he would complain about the housework or the kids' upbringing. Yet, when in a good mood, he sought my company. The love I once had for him was gone, and it was painful, but I couldn't resist, considering our children's life. I endured this hell for 7 long years. Then I found out I was pregnant with our 3rd child. The child inside me was innocent. Olivia seemed happy about getting a new sister or brother, but Natalie, entering her teenage years, must have felt complicated. They both started to help more with the housework, concerned about my health, strengthening our bond. No matter how much I was oppressed by my husband, just having my children made me feel happy. That alone gives my life meaning. When the baby in my belly is born, I'll leave this house. I wasn't going to sacrifice any more of my life. I had confided in my eldest daughter, Natalie, and it seemed she had made up her mind as well. Meanwhile, my health was deteriorating. I had to be hospitalized for preterm labor, but who would take care of the housework? That was all I could worry about. My daughters, though becoming more independent, were still only capable of helping with chores to a certain extent. My mother-in-law, having weakened since injuring her back a few years ago, wasn't much help either. With no other option, I lowered my pride and asked Benjamin to hire a helper. It wasn't for him, but for the children. Perhaps realizing he had no other choice, he agreed to hire a helper. Being away from him for a while during my hospital stay lessened my stress, and my youngest daughter, Emily, was born safely. However, my health didn't improve much even after being discharged. At this rate, leaving with 3 children seemed impossible. I could barely move and only managed housework intermittently. Then, one day, an opportunity came. It was when I had finished preparing dinner and was waiting for Benjamin's return. Holding my youngest, Emily, I dozed off, only to be awakened by Benjamin's arrival. He suddenly raised his voice.
Hey! The husband comes home from work, and the wife is napping so carefree?
Olivia, who was watching TV in the living room, jumped up in shock, and Natalie glared at her father while comforting her sister. "Oh, I'm sorry." As I tried to stand up, I felt dizzy and staggered. Benjamin sneered at me and pulled out an envelope from his bag.
"I think it's time for a lazy wife like you to leave this house."
He showed me the envelope, smirking. When did he start making such a disgusting face?
"Just sign this and get out."
The contents of the envelope were divorce papers. Finally, the day had come. With the joy, uncertainty also crept in. With my condition, I couldn't support the children yet. Seeing my frustrated face, Benjamin laughed even more disgustingly. Agreeing easily might lead him to retract his offer. I deliberately raised my voice.
At least, let me take the children with me.
I had thought he would consider the children a burden, but his response blew away my thoughts.
I can't trust someone like you with the kids.
He was smirking again. He must enjoy seeing me in pain. With that in mind, I raised my voice theatrically.
Please, at least that. Let me take the children with me.
I clung to his legs, pleading. Then, shaking me off, he pulled Olivia's hand and pushed her towards me.
You can take her and the baby. They're not attached to me anyway.
I hugged Olivia close and looked at Natalie.
What about Natalie?
Natalie is off limits, he said, grabbing her from behind.
No! Let her go!
Natalie struggled to escape, but she couldn't match his strength. She's quite useful. I'll take good care of her. Handing Emily to Olivia, I tried to take Natalie from Benjamin. My body was weak, and I couldn't muster much strength. Still, I confronted Benjamin with all the force I could.
This man.
It seemed like he would give in to my determination, but I was no match for his strength.
Stop being so persistent. I'll pay child support for them, so just behave.
With those words, he pushed me away.
Mom!
As Natalie tried to run to me, Benjamin caught her and uttered something terrible. Hey, Natalie.
If you don't obey me, who knows what I'll do to your mom?
He was threatening Natalie using me as leverage. How could he?
If you care about Natalie, you'll leave right now.
Leaving those words behind, he left the house. I hugged my crying children and started packing.
Mom!
Natalie looked at me with a sad expression.
I'm sorry, Natalie. I promise I'll come for you.
I hugged Natalie tightly and spent our last night together. The next morning, having heard everything, my mother-in-law handed me an envelope saying, "It's not much but." It was quite thick, and realizing what it contained, I was overwhelmed with gratitude.
Mother-in-law, please take care of Natalie, please.
She nodded silently, and I bowed my head, then left with Olivia and Emily. After walking for a while, I heard a voice calling from behind.
Mom!
Turning around, Natalie was running outside barefoot. I ran to Natalie and said it once more. It was also a reaffirmation of my own resolve.
I will definitely come for you.
Natalie said nothing more. I took my 2 daughters back to my parents' home and explained everything to them. They didn't blame me for coming back, they accepted me, saying I had done well. My parents doted on the 2 girls, and Olivia seemed to quickly adapt to the new environment. Leaving Emily with them, I started looking for a job. I needed to rescue Natalie from that man's clutches as soon as possible. My parents understood this. I managed to find a job and filed a lawsuit to regain custody of Natalie, but it was difficult to obtain. If only Benjamin had something incriminating against him, but Natalie was excelling in school and there were no financial struggles, so the court saw no issue. I tried visiting Natalie several times, but the timing was never right or Benjamin would find out, foiling my attempts. I could only talk to her over the phone, arranged by my mother-in-law, and 3 years passed like this. One day, I received a call from Benjamin. My mother-in-law Audrey had passed away, and the funeral was over. Just a few weeks ago, I had talked to her on the phone. Detecting my sorrow, Benjamin's tone softened.
Mom's gone, and now it's just me and Natalie at home. I find myself missing the times when you all were here.
I was stunned, speechless at the man who had yelled at and oppressed me now speaking like this.
I've finally understood the importance of family. Why don't you all come back home?
I decided to play along with his words.
Yes. I'd like to pay respects to my mother-in-law and see Natalie too.
Benjamin sounded pleased on the other end of the phone, unaware of mine and Natalie's plan. When Natalie and I reunited, she was already 18 years old. while Olivia, now in middle school, was excited yet nervous to meet her sister after 3 years. Is she my new big sister? Emily seemed to not even remember Natalie's existence. As we hugged during our long-awaited reunion, Benjamin watched us, nodding, his eyes welling up as he said, "A family really should be together." Stepping into the familiar house, I paid my respects at my mother-in-law's photo. I still had the envelope she gave me that day and used, hoping to someday use it for myself, but that was no longer possible. Sighing softly, I heard Benjamin's voice from behind.
"Mom was kind until the end,"
he said, sitting beside me.
"I was out of my mind back then."
Awkwardly, he continued talking while glancing at the daughters chatting in the living room.
"I don't expect forgiveness, but I wish we could spend the rest of our lives together as a family."
Those words were the same as the unforgettable proposal I heard 20 years ago.
"Please spend the rest of your life with me as a family."
Back then, those words made me happy, but now, they brought no joy. The man sitting beside me, now out of shape and fidgeting, waiting for my response, was he really the man I once loved? I had my doubts. Natalie sent Olivia and Emily outside to play and came over to us. I braced myself to speak to Benjamin.
"I have no intention of living here with you."
My blunt words surprised him. Natalie added, like the final blow.
"Today, we're asking you to leave, Dad." "What?"
His bewildered voice was ignored as Natalie calmly continued. The house had been inherited by Natalie after my mother-in-law passed away. The will was with a lawyer.
"I am the owner of this house,"
she said, her voice void of emotion. She recounted how Benjamin tried to dump the housework on her after forcefully separating us. And how my mother-in-law, who couldn't stand it anymore, took over. "Grandma had to put up with your arrogance, and honestly, it was so annoying." Natalie's words flowed endlessly. Benjamin had pushed all his troubles onto Natalie and my mother-in-law while claiming to be busy with work, but in reality, he was womanizing.
"You brought different women home every few months."
The look in Natalie's eyes as she spoke to Benjamin was like looking at filth. While Benjamin was away, Natalie seemed to have been devising a plan with my mother-in-law. All this was done under the premise that she would live with me again. Of course, through communication with my mother-in-law and phone calls with Natalie, I was aware of the plan. After Natalie vented all her pent-up frustrations, she took a deep breath and said,
"So, please pack your things and leave right away."
Benjamin remained frozen, unable to move. He probably never expected his own daughter to say such things to him. His unresolved negative emotions were directed at me.
"You knew about this."
He glared at me. But I was no longer the person I used to be.
"Yes, I knew. I knew about your infidelity even before our divorce."
I could see his face turning pale. Actually, when I resigned, I had a chance to talk with a colleague who revealed that Benjamin had been lying about work and business trips to spend time with other women. My colleague from the same workplace had doubts about my words regarding his busy schedule and told me the truth. Later, she occasionally sent me photos of Benjamin's affairs.
"Friends are important, aren't they?"
She had become his boss by then.
"Do you know where I work now?"
By then, Benjamin had slumped his shoulders, unable to even look at us.
"What should one have? Friends."
I was working at a law firm, doing odd jobs, thanks to a referral from that colleague.
"Now, never show your face to us again."
A few days later, when Benjamin's belongings were all removed, Olivia, Emily, and I returned to the house.
"Is this Emily's new home now?"
Emily's innocent smile was so bright. Since then, Benjamin has been living alone in an apartment. My friend, now his female boss, exposed all his adulterous acts, and there were even women who wanted to sue him. "I've always suspected something fishy since you got married," she said with a laugh. She was the person I dined with when my mother-in-law created some free time for me. Apparently, she had been tracking Benjamin's movements since the time I mentioned I might have seen him in a crowd.
"I was wondering when you would finally ask for alimony."
I'm truly grateful. It had been a while since I last saw her, but she was always the same. Watching Emily play in the cafe's kids area, she squinted her eyes fondly. You rejected a promotion to protect those kids, didn't you? Olivia and Natalie approached the playing Emily. Don't ever let go of your happiness again, she said before leaving the cafe. Natalie is starting college this spring, studying in the law department of a national university, possibly becoming a lawyer. Even though I work and receive alimony from Benjamin, our household still requires a lot of money. As if to fill the gap of the past years, I prepared lunchboxes for Natalie. It's embarrassing to have lunchboxes at college, she'd say, but she ate them every day. Olivia had started a new middle school but seemed happy to reunite with her elementary school friends. Emily, now a senior in kindergarten, started mimicking Natalie and Olivia's way of talking, becoming a bit cheeky. Each of the three girls was growing up bright and lively. The girls, who were once my responsibility, will eventually leave my side. But I'm sure my happiness will continue beyond that. I hope their smiles will be there too. Praying for this, I paid my respects to my mother-in-law and